Welcome to the Brown County Hour.
Coming to you from the legendary Hills of Brown,
where the plum purple haze,
the one nature herself drapes over the hills and hollers,
inspires local characters, artists, and nature lovers.
It's as though the hills themselves conspire to create a beauty and culture in the heart of Indiana.
Sit for a spell and hear the music.
Tall tales,
true stories,
and current goings-on.
Brought to you by folks who still know how to sit by a fire in winter
and swim buck naked in summer. Welcome to episode 77 of the Brown County Hour. This is Dave Seastrom.
And Jim Lemon, along with the rest of the crew. Our musical guest this month is Loretta Vinson. You might remember her from last month when she shared a This Old Guitar story about her 9-string D58 Yari Dreadnought. We'll listen to her interview, and you'll hear what this fancy guitar sounds like as we share some of her music.
We'll also introduce our newest Brown County Hour crew member, Jim Lemon. Jim's had a long career in radio production, and we're looking forward to working with him as he adds his professionalism and great humor to our production team. Brown County recently lost a longtime community leader and major philanthropist, Andy Rogers. One of the things I loved about Andy was his humility. If you didn't know how wealthy he was, you would never guess it by looking at the way he lived, the old cars that he drove, or his infamous hat that I'm pretty sure is older than I am. To say that the man was a true character is an understatement. His time in the county straddled the post-World War II transition from the old ways into modernity, and he had a powerful influence on shaping where we are today. In this episode, Pam Raider shares her memories of a great man and an invaluable friend to the community.
We'll open the show with our Loretta Vinson interview. Jeff Tryon will share his essay on Native Americans, and we'll close this segment with Loretta Vinson's cover of a Leo Kottke tune, Some Cloudy Day.
It's our pleasure to have new musical talent in our studio, Loretta Vinson. Hello, Loretta. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hi, nice to be here.
So you've been in Brown County since 2016, is that what you said?
Yeah, officially.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, welcome to Brown County. You were a Bartholomew County person, which really that's like kissing cousins. So.
Neighbors.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. You were telling a little bit of your musical story, and you're connected to a whole lot of folks that are Brown County musicians, and you played with Tom Rosnowski for 10 years. And
Yeah, I played the stand-up bass with Tom. What did we call ourselves? The Living Daylights. Yeah, that's what we were called. And I picked up the bass kind of out of necessity. I was playing in a bluegrass band with Cara Barnard years ago, and we didn't have a bass. I did find one in town, and I bought it, and I eventually learned to play the thing. We were playing at the Borders store, Cara's band, in Bloomington.
what was the name of that band?
It was the Cara Barnard and the Barn Burners.
Okay.
Yeah. Slats Klug was there shopping that day, and I guess he knew that Tom Rosnowski was looking for a bass player and someone that could sing harmony with him. And he mentioned me to Tom, and it wasn't long till I got a phone call, and Tom was asking me if I could play a story with him in a couple weeks. So, and I said, well, on one condition, and I didn't know Tom. I didn't know who he was or anything. And he said, what? And I said, I got to like your music. So he said, and I didn't know I didn't know anything about him. So he sent me some cassette tapes, and I made it. I got the tunes down in time to play at the story thing, so it worked out great. And I'd stay with him for 10 years.
Cassettes kind of date the experience. How long ago was that?
Gosh, it must have been like 2001, I
Okay.
think. But yeah, we had a good time.
Your current musical activities, you're just kind of getting back into it from what you were talking about.
Yeah, I was on hiatus. Did some, played with a bluegrass band too. Well, I left Tom's band in 2010, I think. My parents were having health problems and such. And I ended up playing just for fun with some characters over here in Brown County. Chris Bryan and Dan Harden and Brandon Lee. We had a little group called Real Time String Band. And we'd play, 19th hole and places like that. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Danny Harden's band has evolved into Hamilton Creek now.
Yeah.
They've been guests on our show. There's so much cross-pollination going on amongst the musicians around here. I mean, and you certainly exemplify that with all of your different experiences. And you just purchased Carolyn Dutton's home.
Well, yeah. I've known Carolyn because she played with Tom's band.
Right.
I'd known her for many years and had been to her house a lot of times. And I told her that if she was ever going to downsize and move out of there to let me figure out how I could get it. And it all worked out, yeah.
Well, and Carolyn's played with everybody and their dog. I mean, her
Yeah.
resume is amazing.
Yeah, she's, what does she call herself? The Kenny G of the fiddle. My singing partner, Jonna Mays, we had a country duet for many years. The Ellie Mays is what we call ourselves. We made a couple CDs over the year, 2008 and 2002.
But you can be heard occasionally at the open mic night at the Brown County Inn.
That's something I'm just dipping my toe into lately. I haven't played in public for many years. I just thought I'd challenge myself a little to get out there, force myself to get out and see what I could remember.
Well, we really enjoyed your music.
Yeah, we hope you keep playing.
Yeah.
So you have this interesting guitar. Would you like to describe that to us?
Yeah, the 9-string, it's an Iyari, a handmade of the Alvarez family. They made some of these guitars back in the early 80s. They didn't make many of them. I couldn't tell you exactly how many, but it's strung like a 12-string, and the 3 bass strings are left single, and the rest of the strings are, as in a 12-string, they would be doubled, and they jangle, that birdsy sound,
Yeah, I was just gonna say birds. Yeah.
So they're like an octave apart.
Yeah, it gives it that little extra jangly thing. And I did find out one night when I was jamming with a friend, there was a little lead part in it that it was mandolin wind. And I also discovered that you can do a little mimic the mandolin on with those strings too. So it's kind of cool. I'm enjoying it. It's a cool guitar.
Well, Loretta, we will look for you at the open mic nights around Brown County, and we really appreciate your coming in this evening. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for asking me, and see you soon.
This is My Brown County with Jeff Tryon. The more I thought about what really makes Brown County, the more I began to realize how we each have our own particular Brown County. In a way, Brown County is what we each bring to it, what we find there for our own, what we each make of it. No one else sees it probably in the same exact way that I do. That's what makes it my Brown County. While my grandson was fixing the driveway where it had been crumbling into the creek, he came across a couple of artifacts not uncommon in Brown County, Indian arrowheads. Rather, one was an arrowhead, reddish and almost perfect with only a chip where one of the narrow shoulders should have been. The other was a perfect spear point, maybe 6 inches long, a very nice find as these things go. I always feel a special connection when I hold something in my hand that was made by other human hands, thousands of years ago. A visceral connection to another time and place, to another human being more or less like me, who ate and drank, lived and loved, hunted and traveled around many of the same places I walk every day. He sat by a fire, chipping off pieces of chert or flint, carefully working the stone with bone tools, trying to make something useful, important, and necessary to his survival. He had probably treasured this nice long spear point. He may have used it many times in bringing home game to feed his family, and then one day he lost it, probably by not being able to track down the deer or boar that he had stuck it into after it had run away. All my life I've been finding these mementos of a past civilization, arrowheads. When we were children, we liked to go to farm fields or gardens when the ground had just been turned, especially when it had then rained upon the new-turned earth, often revealing these ancient artifacts. My cousin has a huge collection of arrowheads, axe heads, throwaways, scrapers, and rocks indented from long use for grinding or pounding nuts, hides, or whatever they could get to survive in those times. There's never been much evidence found of any kind of permanent Native American village or community in Brown County. They were here, obviously, but apparently only to hunt for game or to gather nuts. Apparently the rugged terrain and thick forest and the distance from large navigable waters made Brown County a place they visited but did not settle in. We say they are Native Americans, but of course even they were immigrants like all the rest of us. Their ancestors came across the land bridge that is now the Bering Sea about 1200 BC, following the mammoths and mastodons and other large game. There's no real evidence that these Paleo Indians, who lived roughly during a period from 10,000 to 8,000 BC, were ever in Brown County, which at that time was an Arctic tundra similar to what Alaska is today. The small bands of primitive hunters followed the giant beasts, hunting and migrating with the herds. The rough terrain of Brown County probably kept big animals out. Migratory paths like the Buffalo Trace, which cuts through southern Indiana, generally avoided such rugged topography. The climate was warming, slowly, over time, and in evolutionary history, that inevitably leads to more complex and more settled societies. But archaeological evidence suggests that even after Native Americans were building mounds and large villages elsewhere in Indiana, they still used Brown County mainly for hunting and gathering. The abundance of projectile points and scrapers, nutting stones, and grinders indicate that most occupations here were small temporary camps and that large villages were not common in this area, probably due to a lack of large streams which served as transportation routes for the Native Americans. Although some early archaic points have also been found, it is likely that seasonal use of the area that is now Brown County began around 4000 BC when the oak, hickory, and beech maple forests had been fully established over most of Indiana. According to the artifacts we found, the period of most Native American activity in Brown County was around 3000 BC during the late Archaic period, which lasted from about 4000 to 1000 BC. Over 24 sites have been identified from that period, not really villages, but base camps from which small groups of people hunted. Like the early white settlers, they also harvested the plentiful nuts seasonally available. They used stone tools to process hickory nuts, acorns, and the then abundant chestnuts. People weren't moving around as much as before, but they were still hunting and gathering. They made breads and soups, but they still had no pottery, no containers. They began to try to cultivate plants, growing squash and gourds for containers and domesticating berries and cattail in their first gardens. As time went on, artifacts revealed that they were in contact with other people, trading for flints or other materials from far away. They developed the addle-addle, a spear-throwing stick which increased leverage and so gave a longer throw and greater impact on target. Although Native Americans were certainly traveling through the area by the early woodland period, about 1000 BC to 150 BC, the period is usually marked by the introduction of ceramics, and very little pottery has been found here. The archaeological evidence is that Brown County was still used mainly for hunting and gathering. During the Mississippian period, Native American cultures increased in size and complexity. The Mississippi River Valley was the home of large, permanent agricultural settlements like Cahokia in Collinsville, Illinois, Moundville in Alabama, and the Angel Mound site along the Ohio River in Indiana. Before white settlers arrived, Brown County was governed by the Shawnee tribe. And they gave rights to the Delaware to hunt here, and the Miami got the ceremonial rights to Browning Mountain, according to local Native American enthusiast Teed Howard. He said they met here at least once a year, probably during the solstice, although it's not part of their oral history today. Historian Sam Johnson said the natives who lived mainly in Brown County were living a different, harder lifestyle than those in more permanent settlements along the major rivers. It could be that people in Brown County were outcasts, he said. there is such a thing as hill people. People who lived here in the hills could have been different, tended to be less social, more independent, less on the cutting edge of technology and society. The hilly, more rugged terrain set them apart from the ongoing social movements of these various periods, Johnson said. Just prior to the arrival of Europeans, Native Americans across the continent were in a state of flux. Large, complex towns were abandoned, and Native Americans resettled in dispersed farmsteads. Some archaeologists believe the collapse of these great societies was the result of climate change, causing a change in the growing season. Another reason may be an increased availability of bison herds, drawing people westward. Or perhaps Native Americans simply overexploited the natural resources. By the time Native Americans had direct contact with Europeans, there had been tremendous displacement. Then new diseases and warfare decimated the Native American population further. We think of the native population politely withdrawing and moving off into the west as white settlers took the lands that are now Brown County by treaty in 1821. But the reality was probably much less neat. In Ray Mathis's 1936 A Brown County History, he quotes pioneer Sir Valvo McGuire as recalling, "My mother remembers seeing Indian boys swimming in Salt Creek near what was once the old Hoover Mill. They would lay on the logs, and when a white person showed up, they would dive and swim around with only their heads showing. That was in about 1844 or 45. He also recalled the passing through of a band of 20 Indians from Evansville, some walking, some riding."
This is Some Cloudy Day, written by Leo Kotke. Some cloudy day, the sun won't shine, my blues away, and all I live for seems far away. Some cloudy day, can't go back. It's not the same. Things have changed, and while I counted the hours, the time remains. The time remains.
Now we pause for station identification.
You are listening to the Brown County Hour on volunteer-powered community radio, WFHB, at 100.7 in Brown County, 91.3 and 98.1 in Bloomington, 106.3 at Ellettsville, and online at wfhb.org.
Segment 2 begins with the introduction interview with our new crew member, Jim Lemon. Rick Fettig shares his thoughts about music, and we'll hear from the seed lady and market maven, Torrie Ray, as she discusses Brown County's newest farmers market in Nashville. We'll end this portion of the show with Loretta Vinson performing a Marty Robbins tune, Singin The Blues.
This is Rick Fettig. I had a great fortune not too long ago. I was at one of our local establishments and ended up in a discussion with a gentleman that was there. And I started telling him about the radio show, and then he's recently moved down from Chicago, and lo and behold, he was interested in helping out. So I'd like to introduce to you Jim Lemon. Hey, Jim.
Hey, guys.
And Dave's here with us, so we all
That's
got
right.
a handful of questions for you.
Well,
Let the people know you a little bit.
Jim actually has a long connection to Brown County, going back to childhood, and his father was a famous political figure in Bloomington, Mayor of Bloomington, Tom Lemon.
Yeah, 3 terms.
3 terms. You might have heard of Lake Lemon. He also has a long career in radio, which is kind of where Rick was getting lured in, and we brought Jim into the studio here, and he has joined our crew as one of our engineers. So, Jim, why don't you share some of your background with us? Tell us how your radio experience and some of the other things you've done in your...
I was looking to finally graduate from college, and so I went to Loyola University in Chicago, and with my communication and theater background in the various higher education facilities that I'd been in already at that point, they looked at that, and the woman that was interviewing me said, well, let's go across the street here and take you to the radio station. I think you'd be a great fit. And like any non-commercial facility, they're always looking for somebody to be on the air. And within about 2 or 3 nights, I was doing an overnight shift in Chicago. And it was a dance music station, and you can only do 120 beats per minute. For me personally, I couldn't do it at all. So I volunteered to cover Saturday nights and did Saturday nights from midnight until 7 o'clock in the morning. For about 7 years.
Wow.
And in that point in time, got hired after I graduated as the station manager. And so I was running classes for Loyola Communications Department, and then became the general manager. And in that, just a wonderful time in my life. Was syndicating a show in Chicago that called Community Accents that was on 5 or 6 stations at any given time, because it was community affairs and it was free, and we would dupe it and we would deliver it. And produced Father Pat Brennan's Horizon show, which is, if it's still on the air, it's around 30 years contiguous. And I did like the middle 10 years of that. And he would come in and I'd roll tape and I'd post-produce it and get it distributed for him. As this went on over the course of time, I eventually got involved with a group that was interested in doing a show about living with HIV. And the show was named Aware Positive Health Talk Radio, and it eventually became the first nationally syndicated radio show about living with HIV and what you can do to live a healthier life, what are the newest treatments coming out, et cetera. And that show ran for about 10 years, and pretty proud of that. I was on their board of directors.
Well, that was cutting-edge stuff. In those
At the time, you bet. It was 1992, 3, 4, 5, all through that area.
Yeah, huge amount of fear.
It was leading edge on that.
Yeah.
Eventually, I had to grow up, took a job in software, and I've been doing that ever since.
And now you're back to radio.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to help. You know, I know sometimes that this isn't always an easy thing to do. I'm all trained up down at WFHB, but we live out here. I work till 5 every day, so all of their open shifts that I hadn't fit. I'm ready to go, but I'm not ready to go.
Go back to the overnight shifts.
Yeah, exactly. I can't do it anymore. So I'm happy to jump in. You guys are incredibly entertaining to hang with.
Well, we feel the same way about you, Jim.
But it was kind of funny. If I remember, even though it was community radio and low-powered, in Chicago, you had like a bazillion people audience.
Yeah, it was on top of a 19-story dorm right on Lake Michigan in Rogers Park, and the signal fell on 1.2 million homes.
Yeah, we don't think our audience is quite that large. Yet.
Yet. Okay, yet. That's exactly right.
Room to grow, room to grow.
Well, you know, there is that unlimited potential of the internet that we're beginning to tap into, because that is the future of broadcasting, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that's also an area of your expertise. And, you know, we get a lot of content providers in here, but we don't get engineers. They don't fall out of the trees. I mean, you know, Chuck Wills has been our steadfast rock of Gibraltar, so to speak, in this area. But it's really wonderful to have your help. I mean, this makes a huge difference for us. And it also speaks well to the future of our show.
Which is good to hear.
Yeah,
right.
We're progressing.
Yes.
Well,
movement. It's a
that's
movement.
right.
You want to feel like you're contributing. and you want to feel like you're contributing in a space that's valuable to the community. And so this knocks off all of that.
We hope so, and we feel like we've just begun, and there's so much more to do.
And I'm happy to do it.
Well,
I work out of the house, so I have time to multitask as well.
This is getting out for you.
Yeah. My fiance Marcia will say, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "I'm going to drive to the post office so I can mail this letter." Get in my car, turn up the stereo,
Get the blood
roll
going
down
a
the
little
windows.
bit there.
Yeah, I'm out.
and all I can say is welcome aboard, Jim.
I appreciate it.
It's been wonderful to get to know you, and we're all pretty compatible here, and that's one of the secrets behind our success, I think.
Well, and you warned me about that day one, moment one.
Right,
So,
right. If you don't get along, you don't get to play with the other kids. That's right.
there you go. Pretty well versed in that as well.
Yeah.
So happy to do it. Glad to be back.
All right. Well, thanks for being here and helping us.
Like I say, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Music is a moral law. It gives soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and charm and gaiety to life and to everything. Author unknown. Growing up, my mom on occasion would tell of the trip we made to Virginia and back to see my uncle, who was stationed there in the Navy. She recalled driving through the mountains. I was 4 years old, standing in the back seat of the car, singing Davy Crockett at the top of my lungs. All the kids in my dad's family played musical instruments. My dad played drums, and others played violin, trombone, and trumpet. When I was young, Dad sang in the church choir and played drums in a 5-piece band. His cousins sang in a barbershop quartet. Our family acquired a Kimball baby grand piano at one point, and Mom would play it and sing country love songs frequently in our living room. I played the clarinet up through junior high. I'm still singing a bit, and I've learned a few chords on the guitar. Point being, I've been surrounded by music all my life. You needn't bother asking me who's on first, if you get my drift. A lot can and has been said about music. Shakespeare said, "If music is the food of love, play on." A couple other quotes. Music can change the world because it can change people. Where words fail, music speaks. Music is structural and mathematic. It's healing, it's emotional, and it can even soothe the savage beast. Music is, by definition, vocal or instrumental sounds, or both, combined in such a way as to produce beauty of form, harmony, and expression of emotion. And emotion, by definition, is a natural, instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstances, mood, or relationship with others. Thus, music is an expression of a state of mind. Music is a vehicle for communication, for love, politics, sadness and loss, joy and adulation, struggles in life. Name that tune. Music is all-inclusive. You can write it or compose it. You can perform it. You can just listen and enjoy it. And you can even dance to it. Music is a universal language. It is essential to life, like the rhythm of your beating heart and the sound of the fallen rain. So listen to the rhythm of the fallen rain.
Hey, I'm Torrie Ray. I'm here to talk about the farmers market that we have here in Nashville and Brown County. It's at the Brown County Inn every Sunday from 11 to 2 in the parking lot. So this is a fledgling market. We're only in our second year. So building a market, we're trying to just engage the community, people that have products that they may make or things that they grow. It's a grower-only market. So we're really trying to encourage people to share the food that they grow or the food items that they may process into a value-added item. It's really exciting because we have some really great community collaborators that help us do this market. Of course, I'm kind of the face of the market because it is my passion, but other passionate people have joined in as well. And we have a great music lineup. We do the market 26 weeks out of the year, and we have 26 incredible local musicians that come and support the market as well. Some of the musicians actually come from Indy, but most of them are here right from Brown County. we have a lot of space available still for other people that want to come and either sell goods or just come hang out with us. Really just encourage people to come check it out and see what vendors we have. We have a lot of day vendors, so you never know who is going to be at that market because a day vendor is someone who just comes when they may have something to share. So we have some new people in our community that are trying some new businesses, like Nancy Pooley. She's doing some paper flowers. She's a retired nurse and was looking for another outlet and a hobby, place to share in community. And she ended up having these really neat paper blooms that she makes. We have Brown County Forest Farming, which is Brian Hunt, who's trying to share his love and passion of cultivated and wild mushrooms. There's other people selling shirts, plants, syrups, and finally, it's July. We've got our tomatoes in. We've got our heirloom tomatoes and corn, and it's really fun to see the cult following of tomato lovers, I'll call them. And there's a lot of local organic vegetables as well. And one of the missions of the farmers market is to make organic, local, nutrient-dense food available to our community and more accessible. And we're just trying to culture the idea that local food is really important. And because I'm also the executive director of Seed Brown County, Seed's mission is just to get people to plant more seeds and food. And so it kind of all comes together, and my lives come together at the farmers market where I am every Sunday, 11 to 2. We hope you come out and join us.
My first introduction to botany was in high school. Then, at the formal level in college, I took a class in local flora at a biology field station the university operated on the Mississippi River in western Illinois. I heard classes at the field station were worth taking if you had your summers free, and they were cheaper too, another advantage. Classes were held outside, and they're smaller in number, and most important, they helped identify plants. Those weeds, wildflowers, shrubs, and grasses I walked by and wanted to know what they were. Enrolling fulfilled a desire to know plants better, something I had wanted since childhood and days of working a large family garden. My professor was a kind and patient man who took us out every day on the field station property. We were to listen to his description of the particular plant, write down the family, genus, and species to commit to memory, and take a sample back to the field station to look at under a dissecting scope. Flower and leaf arrangement, how many stamens, pistils, and sepals it had, for example, would help determine the exact identity, and you could do only this with high-powered optics. Within a few days, we had already collected many of the plants in bloom, including some woody trees and shrubs. My stack of 3x5 cards to memorize the scientific name and family of each plant was the only way I could test myself. But we also quizzed each other in between games of evening volleyball and during our supper prep, another way to learn. With the intimate living arrangement of the small dormitory and classrooms, I loved being totally immersed in the natural history of the Mississippi River. This was how learning about nature was supposed to happen, I remember thinking, much better than textbooks and classroom lectures. Soon I was a bit overwhelmed with all the botany we were learning, until a professor at the field station helped confirm for me how important it was to learn plants. He said any good biologist is also a good botanist, referring to food sources and habitat types animals utilized. And since I wanted to be a biologist, I saw the relationships forming when the botany learned in one class helped us learn about niches, ranges, and habitat preferences of an animal we studied in another class. You can't be expected to know how an animal lives, where, and for how long, unless you learn its diet, he said, what it needs to live and where. The plant community is of paramount importance, he said sternly. Don't take it lightly. When I learned that my major, wildlife science, needed a minor, it was a given that botany would be my choice. When I was hired by the Indiana DNR at Turkey Run State Park in the mid-'70s, I saw how plant interpretation to visitors was a popular activity. Many who joined me on hikes and at programs were gardeners or flower growers or just liked trees and plants around the home. But I soon saw I needed more training and education in this fascinating world of plants. So I enrolled at DePaul University in Greencastle in a master's program in botany and took classes there on my days off. My interest in plants had continued when working at Brown County State Park in the late 70s. My staff and I started a collection of all plants in the park, a monumental undertaking we soon learned. Collecting plants in bloom, then to be pressed and mounted on large herbarium sheets then stored by families in large files. Well, it was a fun task, but it took a lot of time. Fortunately, this project soon attracted the attention of a Nature Center volunteer and an ex-Navy man, David Mao. David had no formal training in botany, but it didn't matter. He loved learning about plants, he told me, and we set out to continue this park collection of plants. Along with a photo of the plant, David added GPS coordinates to the herbarium sample, so he knew exactly where in Brown County State Park's 16,000 acres we could find that plant. Little did I know how important this bit of information would help when later I got a call from a pharmacy researcher at the IU Medical School in Indianapolis. He told me he was conducting research on a synthetic compound that had similar properties to a native plant in Indiana, but somewhat rare, he said, and he had hoped we had it growing on the property. His area of research was leukemia, and a plant he had read about was used by early settlers in their treatments. Did we have a plant called blue cohosh growing in Brown County State Park? Yes, and by checking the collected sample, I knew exactly where to go to collect the sample for him. The next day he came down from Indianapolis, took the sample, and was grateful the plant was so quickly found. A year later, he called to say his research was still underway, and by examining the chemical makeup of the park's collected sample, he could attempt to replicate the properties synthetically. In our Nature Center talks on plant conservation over the years, examples like this where a plant can be used in medical science, it can be reason enough to keep them around. Surely, if they help in mankind's understanding, and maybe even survival from a deadly disease, who wouldn't consider them important? But the message goes further, I think. When we understand native plants have many more reasons to preserve and conserve them. When I think of the many things derived from plants, namely the very basic gas exchange we need to breathe, plants and the study of them take on vast importance. So with even a casual glance at a wildflower or fern or shrub, I hope I never take them for granted. And I'm glad I can call all the plants I meet my friends. This has been Jim Eagleman for Nature Ramblings, WFHB FM Radio, the Brown County Hour. Thanks for listening.
Singin' the Blues. Marty Robbins recorded it. That's where I learned it from. Okay, Singin' the Blues. Well, never felt more like singing the blues. I never thought that I'd ever lose your love, dear. How could you do me this way? Well, never felt more like crying all night. Everything's wrong and nothing's right without you. Got me singing the blues. Well, the moon and stars no longer shine. The dream is gone I thought was mine. There's nothing left for me to do but cry over you. Well, never felt more like running away. Where would I go? I couldn't stay without you. You got me singing the blues. I can't live without you. You got me singing the blues.
Now we pause for station identification.
You are listening to the Brown County Hour on volunteer-powered community radio, WFHB, at 100.7 in Brown County, 91.3 and 98.1 in Bloomington, 106.3 in Ellettsville, and online at wfhb.org.
Cari Ray opens our final segment with her story about trout fishing. Dave Seastrom shares his version of the time-honored tradition of building your own home in Brown County. And we'll hear Pam Raider's remembrance of community leader Andy Rogers. The show will close with Loretta Vinson cover of She Ain't Comin' Home by Frank Dean.
Hi, this is Cari Ray,
and you're used to hearing me with a For a Song segment. But this time, I have another story to tell. A fishing story. We'll call it a trout tale. I spent a wonderful, restorative week in the upper regions of the Michigan Mitten recently. But there was something I had been chasing all week that, as of Thursday, had eluded. I've been fishing all my life and fly fishing for several years now, mostly on our southern Indiana lakes, rivers, and streams. I know how to find and land most of our resident fish on the fly, but I've always wanted to stand in a river and land a wild, native trout. Someday I'll afford a guided trip or fly school, but this particular week, I'd been haunting fly shops, watching local anglers, wading rivers, floating rivers, chasing hatches, and throwing just about every bug and streamer pattern and size you can imagine to tighten a line on trout. Any dang trout. On our last day in the northernmost parts of the Manistee National Forest, though I was still empty-netted, we decided to make the day more about paddling. So we loaded up and headed for the Pine River, a stretch not guided or even reported by most Michigan outfitters. It's tight, winding, and fast, with nearly 3 times the fall of most Michigan rivers. And it's not stocked, nor home to any anadromous fish. Only wild, native trout reside in its vastly varied depths. Stand-up paddleboards, which were, in hindsight, an interesting choice for a fairly technical paddle on a river with Class 1 rapids, were the craft of the day. And while fishing wasn't really on the menu, I did grab my trusty little glass 3-weight and laid it on the deck down the middle of the board between my feet. Come on. Being on water without a fishing rod is like going to a jam without an instrument. 45 minutes or so floating past the shady, deep waters of some really fishy-looking holes proved too much to bear, and I pulled up on a sandbar on the inside of a bend opposite a particularly fine-looking one that begged just a few casts. The Pine is more of a nymphing than dry fly fishing river, especially the middle of the afternoon in June. Never mind that I had none of the fancy dry flies I had scooped up on one of my many fly shop stops. So I tied on a generic-looking, fluffy little bead-eyed bug, made a couple of good back casts to get the distance I wanted, and gave it a toss up and across the river. Let it drift, stripped it in. Nothing. I wasn't even certain I was doing it right at this point, and after a week of fervent failure, my expectations were anything but high. Another cast. Nada. Okay, one more. Let it drift, let it swing, start stripping it in, and then bang, I felt it. That glorious tug at the end of the line that happens only when you've hooked a live one. And when that little sweetheart leapt from the dark swirling water, I swear my ticker skipped a talk. My companion, who was waiting just around the bend, initially mistook my non-lingual squeals of joy as cries for help. Fortunately, I realized quickly that I sounded as though I might be drowning, and shouted, "I caught a fish!" And then, with the confirmation provided by a second leap from the water, added, "It's a trout! A trout!" Now, I've heard some folks say that there's something magical about trout. And while I have long enjoyed the thrill of catching fish, especially on the fly, I always thought that sounded a little too woo-woo for me. But when I put my shaking, wetted hand under the belly of that little beast, heart pounding, and safely released it back to the boiling depths it calls home, I was a convert, a true believer. At this point in my life, I've likely caught thousands of fish. I fought tougher and landed bigger. But hooking that first wild trout on the fly, standing knee-deep in the chilly water of a crystal-clear river, a cloudless sky above, beneath the ancient gaze of the bending pines, that comes as close to the feeling of reeling in my very first fish as a child as I think it gets. And I owe that rehydrated moment of childhood wonder to a little brown speckled fish. Maybe the old-timers are right. Trout are magic.
Building your own home is a time-honored tradition in Brown County, and it's likely that the early homes built here were constructed by the families that ended up living in them. I have no doubt there was also some horse trading going on by folks who didn't have the skills to build their own homes. Homesteading is like that, and neighbors helping neighbors is the way the early population got established. In more recent times, there's been a resurgence of this activity, and it continues to this day. I know many people who built their own home from scratch or extensively rebuilt the home that they live in. The memory of building my own home came to mind at a recent party my wife and I attended, and I thought I'd share my version of a classic Brown County tradition. When we moved to Brown County, we purchased an old farmhouse that had been added onto but still needed a lot of work. Because we didn't have any money, I did all of that work myself. I wanted a deck, so I built one out of old barnwood. And when that one rotted in a couple of years, I did some homework and built a covered porch out of green oak that stands there to this day. A few years later, I was working for some friends who were building their own home on Possum Trot. We fell in love with it, and we were able to purchase the 22 acres on contract. Our property sits high on a ridgetop with a few acres of relatively flat land in the center of it, and we decided to make a small clearing for a garden and orchard. A deal with a local timber buyer fell through when he tried to lower the price after I'd cut the logs, so we decided to cut the timber into boards using a bandsaw mill. Over the next several months, we sawed a lot of boards, and we needed a barn to properly store them. At the time, there were no building inspections, but you did have to get a building permit. I applied for a storage barn permit, and I was told they weren't available unless you had a finished house on the property. I tried to explain that I needed the barn to store the wood to build the house, and they wouldn't budge. So I asked if there was another type of barn that I might legally build, and they said, yes, an agricultural barn. I said, fine, then I want a permit for an agricultural barn, and $50 later, I had my permit. To help realize the dream of building my own home, I acquired a big book on carpentry and read and reread it until I had a basic understanding of construction. However, there is no substitute for actual experience, and my path to learning was often a trial by fire. When I built the barn, we didn't have electricity, and the big timbers were cut with a chainsaw, and the smaller boards were cut with handsaws. Each nail was driven in by hand, the same way my grandpa did, one nail at a time. Eventually, the barn was full of green oak that was stacked with stickers to facilitate air drying. We had lots of 1 and 2 inch thick boards that became the exposed framing and finished floor of the house. We also had some large timbers to hold it all up. The wood was air-dried for almost 3 years when I began to build the house. It takes a year to dry a 1 inch thick board, so the 1 and 2 inch material was ready to use. The bigger 8 by 12 beams weren't completely dry, but they were dry enough to be suitable building material. My old friend Dean Walker did the excavation for the house and dug the septic field and installed the tank. When our new well failed, he suggested that we install a cistern for our domestic water needs. And both of these systems were up and running when we moved in. By the time the project began, I had worked out a deal with RAMC, and we had electricity to build the house with. When the concrete walls and the floor were in place, we had a big beam-raising party. Lots of friends lent their backs and hands, and in a single day, we had the post and beams in place. Over the next 18 months, I worked with occasional help, and eventually the interior of the house was mostly finished. Like I said, there was no building inspections, and subsequently, there were no occupancy permits. So we were able to move into an unfinished plywood box covered in Tyvek. That was 31 years ago. Since that time, I've added 4 porches and 1 sunroom addition to the house. It's reasonable to ask if the project is finished. And I'd have to answer, no, not exactly. When I consider the old Chinese curse, house done, man dies, I might never be finished. This is Dave Seastrom. See you next time.
Andy Rogers was a benefactor to many institutions in our community, but some may not know the role he played in WFHB's beginnings and our own Brown County Hour. My first job upon moving here was at the welfare office. It was a great way to learn the lay of the land and the major players of the county. Of course, Andy's name came up often. I heard how he virtually owned all the hotels and restaurants and controlled things in the county. I formed an image of a fat cat, cigar-smoking, bossy man in fine clothes. Imagine my surprise when one night at the courthouse peace vigil, a friend pointed him out. There, crossing the street, was a smallish, thin man in blue jeans and suspenders, wearing what looked like a Robin Hoodish hat. This was our town father, Andy Rogers, a really down-to-earth man. On Saturday evenings, he would come to town, park illegally next to the Nashville house, and walk across the street to his office. At first, when passing our group, he made no eye contact, and later, maybe a nod. Only after I brought my dog Buddy did he come over and befriend us. After that, he stopped by every week, probably more to visit with Buddy, but it was my entree into a friendship with Andy. Years later, I was asked to go to WFHB in Bloomington. They were trying to raise money for a translator in Brown County. There were only 4 or 5 of us, one being Andy Rogers. Turns out he had played a big donor role in getting the station started some 25 years ago. The ball got dropped on the translator project until one Saturday evening Andy invited me to a meeting with the station people the following Monday. The initial meeting was just Andy, me, and 2 people from the station, and so began a small committee with a short window to raise a lot of money. I don't think Andy attended another meeting. True to form, he stayed in the background, yet kept tabs on the project. After raising quite a bit of money, I approached Andy for a match challenge, and he said yes with no hesitation. His donation and influence, along with a big grant from the Community Foundation, made not only the translator possible, but our own Brown County Hour show. I'm not sure if he ever heard one of our shows, yet he always asked me how things were going. By this time, I had gotten to know him well enough to realize how much he cared about the community as a whole and what a terrific sense of humor he had. In those days, he attended many governmental meetings and played a big role in the Community Foundation and many other community organizations. Our paths would cross in those arenas, too. He talked of many things in our meetings. I learned he spent summers as a youth with the park naturalists, as his father ran the Abe Martin Lodge for years. This is where his love of Brown County was born, and he never wavered from it. Not only did he support many organizations, he also helped individuals down on their luck, somewhat behind the scenes, never claiming credit. He had a curious way of holding his cards close to his chest. As he queried me about my activities, he was collecting information without revealing much of his own thoughts. This is how he kept his finger on the pulse of the community. He had heart and vision that went way beyond making money, at which he was very good. The stories I had heard about Andy controlling the town and the county were not quite true. He wasn't controlling so much as fostering an environment. Some say he held back development, but maybe he protected us from becoming just another tourist town. After all, isn't the quaint small-town atmosphere of caring people what most of us have come to love and enjoy about Nashville? Thanks, Andy, for being a friend and benefactor to many.
Here's a song written by my good friend Frank Dean. It's called She Ain't Coming Home. She lit a smoke through the match, had herself a train to catch Don't confuse her with the facts. She ain't coming home. Said it can't be like before. Someone like her, well, she needed more. She didn't flinch when she hit the door. She ain't coming home. She called late last night, tired of the traveling, weary of the fight. Said she don't want to live alone. Said she misses her old bed, but I meant every word I said. She can cry and plead and beg, but she ain't coming home. She called late last night, tired of the traveling and weary of the fight. Said that she don't want to live alone. Said she misses her old bed, but I meant every word I said. She can cry and plead and beg, but she ain't coming home. She can cry and plead and beg, but she ain't coming home.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 77 of the Brown County Hour, recorded in our studio at the History Center here in downtown Nashville, and brought to you the first Sunday of every month at 9 a.m. and the following Wednesday at 6 p.m.
The Brown County Hour is brought to you by a diverse group of folks who believe, now more than ever, the world is for everyone.
This show was produced by
Chuck Wills,
Pam Raider,
Rick Fettig,
Vera Grubbs,
Cari Ray.
and Dave Seastrom. We would also like to thank Slats Klug for our theme music. You have been listening to the Brown County Hour.
coming to you from deep in the woods of Brown County, Indiana.
celebrating the arts, culture, and nature that make this such a unique community.
Visit us online at browncountyhour.com.
The Brown County Hour is a production of WFHB.
Volunteer-powered, listener-supported community radio for South Central Indiana.
Take me back to my old Brown County home.